Louise, really good to have with you. Those here will have seen the biography. A policy manager at Energy UK, just talking about the fact you've been there for a year. What a year to start working as a policy manager in energy. Not sure you expected quite all of these things to happen when you took that post. Energy UK, a voice for the energy industry. And that energy that we all rely upon. And Louise, you lead on low carbon heating and energy efficiency policy with a background, as we see here, in policy and public affairs and public relations. And I was reading an article from Energy UK today in which you're quoted quite freely. That sense of what you're doing here is really addressing those issues here that so many families in this country and all around the world are facing with the turbulence and the impact of all that's happened on families and the connection that there is in that to our care for the environment and saving the world indeed. So Louise, we are really very fortunate indeed to have you here, and we look forward very much to all that you have to say. Again, those just joining us, welcome, and apologies for the change of a link, but very good to see you. Hopefully some others will come and join us soon. But Louise, we're with you.
Well, thanks so much, and thanks for inviting me to speak to you all this evening. Really looking forward to the discussions later to get your reflections as well. I'm just going to set up my presentation. So hopefully everyone can see that okay. And yeah, I'll be responding to this very grand title or question for this seminar of Saving the World and Energy Policy. So my background is in construction policy, and I've been in energy for a year now, looking specifically at heat decarbonisation and energy efficiency. So I'm going to be talking today about the role of buildings in achieving net zero. So for those of you who don't know Energy UK, we're a trade association. So we're a membership body for businesses in the energy industry, and we represent a very broad spectrum. So we represent electricity generators and energy suppliers and service providers in the spaces of heating and technology. So companies that develop, for example, software solutions for those specific products. We don't represent upstream oil and gas. And we also don't represent network interests. So we don't represent the national grid and transmission or low voltage networks either. But when we do our policy work, we always have that system-wide view, accounting for the generation right through to the supply to homes and businesses. As you can see from these figures, energy makes this really significant contribution to our economy, both in the investments it creates and in the jobs it creates, and it's also a vital service and resource as well. We put out a number of publications, and these two in the bottom right-hand corner are our most recent publications on decarbonising heat in the middle and energy efficiency on the right-hand side. So we do look at very specific areas of the industry, but we always take that system level view in doing so. And in the next, hopefully 15 to 20 minutes or so, if I've got my timings right, please let me know if not. I'm just going to talk about why the Climate Change Committee has talked about the need to reach near total decarbonisation of existing buildings to get to 2050, why that will all be bringing forward really important benefits across society and for our economy, how that in turn enables us to decarbonise the power system as a whole, and what the benefits are in turn for customers as well in that kind of new fit for the future energy system, why there's some challenges to doing this work, and what the roles of different actors are in overcoming those challenges. So you may have seen some of these stats before, but we have around 28 million buildings in the UK, many of which are quite old, so built pre 1973 oil shock, many built before the Second World War as well. They are typically heated by fossil fuels, and we have quite a kind of broad range of different ownership profiles as well, which are of importance to the way that we want to carry out this retrofit work. The graphs on the right-hand side show really clearly on the top right the rate of insulation installations that we'll need to see between now and 2050 in order to reach what the Climate Change Committee calls for in terms of that near total decarbonisation of homes. And these graphs are taken from the Climate Change Committee's 6th carbon budget. The graph on the left demonstrates how energy demand in retrofitting our homes and insulating them, reducing heat loss, will help to also reduce energy demand. And this is important because buildings are currently responsible for 20% of total UK emissions, most of which come from burning fuel for heating. So we have to address that to reach net zero. But there's obviously other factors as well. So over the past year, we've seen an unprecedented increase in international wholesale gas prices, resulting in the Ofgem price cap being set at over £4,000 in January, which would have been completely unaffordable for many people without the intervention of government with the energy price guarantee and other supports. It's also really vital for reducing the amount of gas that we have to import from other countries as well. And that will help reduce our reliance on kind of countries that we don't necessarily want to be relying on. And the good news is that there's multiple benefits to doing this work. So living in warmer, drier homes that are free from mold will really help to relieve a significant burden on the NHS. So the Building Research Establishment estimates this cost to be around 2.5 billion a year. And you can also see how that will really help with productivity. So people working from home, us all joining this meeting today, you can concentrate so much better when you're warm, when you're in a dry home. And it helps for children as well, doing their homework in the evening. They're going to be able to concentrate much better if the conditions are right. And all of that work, looking at that graph in the previous slide, means that we're going to have to recruit a large number of people into the construction industry to deliver that. So this graph, again, from the 6th carbon budget, demonstrates how many people will need to come into the industry. And the darker constituencies on this map highlight that they'll be in areas that would really benefit from investment and job creation as well. So there's that political angle. So as I talked about, the work in reducing energy demand and also in changing the way that we heat our homes away from natural gas, which is not compatible with net zero, is going to enable a net zero power system more broadly. And Energy UK's vision for that future system is one that customers see as fair and which delivers excellent service choice and money to all homes and businesses. And in terms of the actual kind of generation, we'll obviously see more intermittent renewable generation like wind and like solar. But despite energy demand hopefully reducing, we will also in parallel see demand for electricity increasing through the electrification of transport, the lion's share of heating need, and also industrial processes and business activities as well. So there'll be a huge increase in demand, but kind of the need to balance that with intermittent renewable generation. And there's multiple different heating technologies that are going to help to enable that transition. So you might have heard of heat pumps. Air source heat pumps take heat from the air and move that into the home. There's also ground source heat pumps as well. Heat networks are a really interesting solution that are very popular in places like Denmark and Sweden. They're typically great for kind of urban and densely populated areas. So they take energy from a single source. It could be a ground source heat pump. It could be reusing waste heat from nearby industry or data centers even. And then through a network of pipes, it distributes that heat to connected buildings, and it can service very, quite big buildings as well, like hospitals. Hydrogen boilers may play a niche role in heating decarbonisation around where we'll see that there's anticipated to be around 5 hydrogen clusters in the UK. So potentially in homes around that area, it might be that there's hydrogen available for those homes to use that as a source of heating. And then there's other solutions as well, like biomass boilers, which the government supports through the Boiler Upgrade Scheme. And so focusing in on what that net zero home of the future looks like, there are kind of multiple different assets and changes that we can expect to see. And this is going to mean that each home is quite unique as well in terms of its array of different appliances and interaction with the grid. So hopefully, or we must at least see an improvement in the fabric energy efficiency of all homes to keep them cool in the summer and keep them warm in the winter and prevent heating loss. We'll need to see low carbon heating installed. Maybe there'll be some microgeneration like solar PV, maybe there'll be a battery. There might be an electric vehicle in the garage. We need to conclude the smart meter rollout and ensure that as many homes as possible have a smart meter so that we can collect more data about supply and demand and help balance that kind of challenge that I talked about of intermittent renewable generation and increased demand for electricity. That can be enabled through time of use tariffs. So that will see people using their appliances when it's cheaper and greener to do so. So the carbon intensity of the grid is less. And so that sends a price signal that it's cheaper to run your dishwasher or your washing machine at that time. And the development of home energy management systems automates all of that process. And so smart appliances are also needed to support that too. This diagram on the right-hand side is from, again, from the Climate Change Committee's Fit for the Future report, which has a really lovely diagram of the different kinds of things that we'll see. And I also wanted to flag the Demand Flexibility Service, which you may have seen this winter, which was established by the National Grid ESO and was delivered by a range of suppliers. This T-shirt is from Octopus Energy, who participated, and it essentially paid customers to turn down their energy usage at peak times and to avoid coal being called on over the winter in response to peaks in demand. And people were rewarded financially for doing that. And there was a huge amount of interest, and it showed that there was a huge amount of capacity in people shifting their usage. And so that's something that we expect to see increasingly, either manually, which is how it was kind of done through this scheme, or eventually automatically through those home energy management systems. So all of this paints a very rosy picture for the future. But there are a lot of kind of barriers to overcome to get there. And we have seen the rate of retrofit, the improvement of homes drop significantly since 2013. And there's a number of challenges around this. So each home is completely unique in its construction, in the demands of the household, how it's used, and all these things mean that it's difficult to get an economy of scale and roll solutions out on a large scale. Each approach is very tailored, and that means that we also have quite a manual approach to it as well. So we need lots of people in the industry, and we need lots of specialist tradespeople too. So that's quite a big challenge, and ultimately that does add to the cost of it as well as the kind of material requirements and other aspects as well. So there are other challenges too. So for example, I've got ideology here. So in the British Energy Security Strategy published by Boris Johnson's government, there was a reference to our homes as our castles, and that the government isn't the right kind of institution to be telling people what to do with their homes. So that's a challenge from a policy and political point of view. There's also not, given that kind of challenge around not having a one-size-fits-all solution, we don't necessarily have freely available information and tailored information for people to go and look at to decide what they can do to their home to save money and decarbonize. So that's a challenge too. And the final one here around measuring success just refers to the fact that we have EPC ratings, but they're quite a blunt instrument to measure what's typically be quite nuanced in terms of the way that energy is used in the home. And the other thing to say is that insulating your home
You're seeing people from different migrant.
Improves comfort levels. Sorry, I wasn't sure if someone was talking to me, but I'll carry on. So you can retrofit your home to improve comfort levels, but ultimately you might just kind of adjust the quality of living that you expect at home. So you might not actually turn down your thermostat in response to the insulation. You might just get used to living more comfortably, in which case we haven't really reduced energy demand at all. So this is a challenge as well. I'm going to try and speed up a bit because I'm aware of time, but the government is responding to this through in a number of ways. So they have their fuel poverty targets for 2030 and 2035, and there's a range of specific schemes which are in place to achieve this. So the energy company obligation is delivered by energy suppliers to fuel poor and low-income households. And we've currently got Eco4, but it's been running since 2013 with different iterations. This version of the scheme is delivering whole house retrofits, and it will deliver them to 450,000 homes over the next 4 years. And as I mentioned, it's an obligation on suppliers, so a lot of Energy UK members. And then there's also very specific schemes as well. I think the Home Upgrade Grant might be of particular interest. So that's for low-income off-gas grid homes to invest in energy efficiency and low carbon heating. And that's being delivered via local authorities. So you need to go onto your council's website to see if you can access that funding via the local authority. The Great British Insulation Scheme launched last month, and this is a 3-year scheme open to anyone in council tax bands A and D. And you can access either fully funded or partly funded measures such as loft insulation or cavity wall insulation. And I think the EPC rating of your home has to be D or lower. And then the government's also consulting on regulation as well. The private rented sector, we've got targets for the commercial sector. There's potentially going to be some requirements on mortgage lenders to transparently publish what the average asset portfolio is in terms of the EPC rating for the homes that they lend to. And we're also seeing a step change in new builds from 2025. So the energy industry is stepping up as well. And the energy industry is making quite significant investments, specifically in the kind of heating solutions that I talked about. So air source heat pumps, as well as that kind of challenge around helping people to access cheaper energy when it's greener. So I'm just going to list off a few of the examples from our member companies. So in terms of new ways to pay for heat, Good Energy, which is a supplier, has launched a low-cost finance subscription service for its customers who are on heat pumps. And it provides a service including installation and maintenance. PH Jones, which is a subsidiary of Centrica, has been involved in installing ground source heat pumps through the government's Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund, which is a fuel poverty scheme. And of course, as I mentioned, all of the suppliers are obligated to deliver the energy company obligation as well for fuel poor homes. Octopus Energy recently released Cozy Octopus, which is a tariff that helps optimize energy usage for heat pumps. So it shifts when they're being used to 2 lower peak times during the day. And following their first kind of trials of that tariff, they found that people have saved around £100 a year on their energy consumption. Passive UK is one of the service providers that I mentioned at the start. So they've developed a kind of software that helps people to manage their assets. So accessing that lower cost energy, but it's all an automated process. And AmpX is a digital energy platform that does that for lots of assets, so aggregating them all together to provide that flexibility and it kind of really increase the impact of lots of smaller flexible assets. Lots of our members are really involved in the government's research and development programme. So E.ON worked with Newcastle City Council as part of the electrification of heat demonstrator project to install heat pumps in lots of or some low-income areas. to try and understand what customers need to be able to fully take advantage of that new technology and understand how it works. It's quite unfamiliar, so what was needed there. And in terms of the supply chain, EDF has made significant investments in its heat pump installer network, so it's helping to train new entrants into the industry. So I hope that gives you a flavour of how much activity is going on. And that brings me on to my final slide, which is the way in which households and businesses can also respond to this challenge. So you may have seen, and I'd be interested to know if you've seen any of these campaigns over the winter. So there's the Money Saving Boiler Challenge from Nesta, which encouraged people to turn down the flow temperature of their combi boilers to 60 degrees, as that helped to save a significant amount of energy when aggregated over many people. I think it was hundreds of thousands that participated. And it's also a really great way of saving money without affecting comfort. One Home launched the Big Loft Insulation Drive, which encouraged people to install loft insulation to help reduce energy demand and save money. The Help for Households government campaign, this signposts where people can go to get financial support, but also behaviour changes to save money, like turning appliances off at the wall, not using radiators in rooms that you don't use, as well as kind of investor save options. So things like draft proofing, putting some insulation around your hot water tank, investing in loft insulation, that kind of thing. It kind of gives a picture of what you can do there. But there are kind of other things that we can do, that, you know, people can do and businesses can do to participate in the transition more broadly. So that includes having a smart meter installed, so that we have a better idea of that supply and demand question, and more data that will help us to make sure that we can match up intermittent supply and demand. The likes of Energy Systems Catapult, which are a kind of research and development company, they have a living lab, so they work with people to trial and test different technologies, combinations of technologies, to kind of give data back to the government and other companies to help refine and shape their policy. And this bottom right kind of picture here is taken from the government's Home Energy MOT service. So they're increasingly using gov.uk to provide more information or sources of information about what you can do to improve the energy rating of your home and save money. So that's it from me. A couple of questions I'd be interested in as well when we break out is I'd love to hear where you go to get information on how you might want to green your home or save money, and what kind of role you might see the government playing in this, and the energy industry and energy companies as well. So thanks very much, and I'm very sorry if I've gone over.
No,
but, here's my contact details as well.
Thank you. Catherine, can we put those in the chat, if that would be really helpful to do that? Louise, really kind of grateful for that, and such kind of positivity there about the challenge, but about ways in which we are going to address that. And we're going to come back to your questions there. But that just connects beautifully, I think, to Simon Pugh-Jones, who we've also got with us this evening. Simon, I think your background is in architecture, but you're also very much involved in the whole route to net zero, and have been involved, particularly for us in the Church of England, in developing our route map to net zero, which is why I love that sense of connection between that which Louise has been talking about there. Also connections with Bath Rugby, I think, and the team at Bath Rugby. And I was saying to Simon earlier on that I love the fact that I found an article written by him called "Changing Churches Made Easy." It is, I think, a guide about net zero, not about what to do if you don't like the vicar. But I'm sure that might be another good publication that we'll find somewhere else along the way. But really great to have you here, and that connection between the two of you in getting us thinking this evening. And Simon, let's come straight to you. And then, Chris, you'll be keeping a note of those questions as well. I know that we'll think about when we come to our groups later on. But Simon, over to you.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I'd also want to thank Louise for setting out that rich context of vision setting and goals and initiatives. And I'm glad you mentioned barriers too. I love ambitious policies and clear statements of belief and vision. And I get excited about audacious targets for the future. And my heart quickens to imagine how the world will be better when we get there. So policies for a net zero church by 2030, ambitions to build homes for the homeless, a vision to insulate existing houses. These are all good things to talk about. I also know the flaw in the setting of such goals. I illustrate that every year when I resolve that this will be the year I run a marathon. Or this spring I will clear out the garage. To my shame, 2 of my children have never known the simple pleasure of having a stair carpet, as I took the old one out 18 years ago and have never come good on the oft-repeated pledge to get round to replacing it. I'm a very good illustration of stating clear and bold resolve, but not quite getting around to it. Some people are much better than me, and I'm sure some are worse. With climate change, there is, of course, the extra dimension about faith, that as Christians, our response to climate change is founded in not just the belief that we need to act for the sake of the survival of ours and future generations, but that the world we're seeking to save is God's creation. We reference that whenever we read the Apostles' Creed. I believe in God, the Father Almighty, creator of heaven and earth. And there it is, another robust, unequivocal statement of belief. I believe in God, the creator. I believe in climate emergency. I pledge to seek net zero by 2030, and I will soon do something about it. I will not tarnish you all with the same brush of tardiness. You are, after all, here, expressing a keen interest in climate mitigation. But I do worry about humankind in general. We've known definitively for 80 years that tobacco kills us, and yet we still haven't completely kicked the habit. It's 14 years since we were told that diesel cars are a really bad idea, and yet you can still buy them. There are lots of complex reasons why habit changing is difficult. And well, procrastination is complicated, and it's by no means always bad. But we do have to change faster if we're going to have a hope of passing the world on to future generations with a clear conscience. If we are to have a hope of being anywhere near close to net zero by 2030 or 2050, and if we're actually going to save God's creation. I think there are probably 5 ways we can help make change happen. One is legislation. I think that establishing and enforcing green laws has a part to play. But it didn't work for smoking or for diesel cars. There are too many vested interests politically, and in any case, I'm not that good at being told what to do. One is very definitely policy and statements of ambition and belief. Such things are very important. But I have a very clear policy on stair carpet replacement, and that's not going too well so far. The other 3 come as a group. They are honesty, open-mindedness, and desire, 3 good Christian attributes. That's honesty to recognize the realities of climate change, to make them real, not abstract concepts that don't really affect us. Open-mindedness is about a willingness to believe that change might be better, realizing, for example, that swapping a generic, boring combustion engine car in a city traffic jam for a good modern bike isn't just doing the right thing. It's better, it's faster, they're easier to park, cheaper to run, they don't break down so much. On a bike, you can stop at a moment's notice and buy an ice cream. What's not to like? Desire is about craving for the world. The sheer creation-affirming pleasure of a lung full of clean morning air. The deliciousness of the first sun-warmed plum of the season picked off a tree in a garden, compared to the preserved in nitrogen produce of somewhere far away plastic-wrapped supermarket option. Such things promise much reward, but also carry risk. Cycling in a hilly city in the rain is no fun. A sharp, unripe plum can be the wrong kind of taste sensation. But buses run on rainy days too, and unripe plums still make excellent crumble. Let me give you some more examples. For me, the honesty and realization of personal responsibility about climate change came via the question, when was zero? If you look at the various IPCC graphs of climate warming and average global temperature rise, keep 1.5 alive and all that, take a look back at when zero was. The point where the climate was last the average temperature it's supposed to be. It's roughly 1975. It's not some legacy of the Industrial Revolution to do with mills and steam engines. It's in our lifetimes or in our parents' lifetimes. And yes, there's some legacy stuff in the mix, but the actual increase broadly equates to when car ownership increased, to when we started installing central heating in our houses, to when we started flying to faraway holiday destinations, to when we developed a taste for plastic wrapped out of season food. My son really drove this home recently when he said to me, "Dad, how will I explain to my grandchildren that their great-grandpa drove a diesel car when he knew that burning fossil fuel was doing so much harm?" Ouch. For an even greater reality check, I challenge you to search the web for pictures of species of creatures that have become extinct in the last 10 years, or glaciers that aren't there anymore, or communities and cultures already displaced by changing weather patterns. You will find a lot of beautiful things that have gone already. And to open-minded listeners, let me tell you how we've just done something impossible with church heating. As a contributor to the Church of England's Route Map to Net Zero document, I am very conscious of the burden placed on individual parishes to deliver on the church's policies, especially when it comes to heating. Heating a church is a really big problem because churches are really big. They have huge mass and huge volume. To heat up all of that, to achieve reasonable comfort with affordable heating bills and low or no carbon, well, it's got to be impossible. In the Bristol Diocese, we got to thinking about this and how heating the people, not the building, has to be a better approach. We looked again at radiant heating. A good theory, but far from popular with DACs or conservation officers. Good theory because it's targeted and directional. You only heat the space you need, not the whole mass and the whole volume. Good theory because radiant heating is relatively instantaneous. You only heat the space when you need it to be warm without the preheat time of central heating or heat pumps. And radiant is usually electric, so that's easy to decarbonize. But it's often been done really badly. Industrial looking fittings, out of keeping with a house of God or a listed building, strongly directional heat that leaves you frazzled on one side and freezing on the other, and a harshness of heat that's likely to do terrible harm to the historic fabric of your building. We thought it doesn't have to be that way. When we light a church, we don't use powerful spotlights everywhere. We use light emitters, light bulbs that give a diffuse and gentle glow, housed in elegant fittings placed above where the light needs to go. So for heating, why not use state-of-the-art, modern, gentle, radiant heat emitters in elegant fittings suspended above where the heat needs to go? You could even put lights on them too. Well, others already make something similar-ish, but they're either beautiful and staggeringly expensive or not very beautiful and still really expensive, and none of them are using the very latest state-of-the-art infrared diffuse heat emitters. We developed this idea with a company called Herschel Infrared in Bristol. We made prototypes. We conducted a trial in a church in Bristol. That's just been independently evaluated with the headline conclusion that it works really well. The congregation at the trial church absolutely love their radiant chandeliers. They love the feeling of comfort they give them, and they love their carbon savings. Of course, being electric, they are a lot more expensive to run. Well, we expected they would be. A kilowatt of electricity is a lot more expensive than a kilowatt of gas. But the parish treasurer tells me otherwise. On their gas central heating, the per service heating cost would have been about £75. On their new radiant heaters, it's £17.50. So to heat a church more comfortably than it was before at lower cost without harming historic fabric with very low carbon is possible. In fact, it is better. Now imagine that story about church heating the other way around, that radiant heating was the norm, and I was telling you about the exciting new concept of central heating, burning large quantities of fossil fuel in a church crypt, pumping it around the building via large holes drilled through historic fabric to radiators, also fixed to historic fabric and pews and walls that would eventually heat all the air and the mass of the building to a point where the congregation will feel some vague benefit. You might detect a bias against central heating, and you'd be right. Apart from the intrinsic waste of energy, it's not actually proper human comfort. Light a log fire and people rub their hands and snuggle in appreciatively. Fire up the radiators to an even room temperature of 20 degrees, and I don't ever recall getting that same joyful, appreciative human response and sense of comfort. I bought my family electric underblankets this winter. That was shameless compensation for this, because at this cost, the heating was going to go off overnight. It turns out that they are loved more than the heating ever was. My youngest tells me that it's one of the greatest joys in life to get into a pre-warmed bed, and observes how, in fact, it would be pointless to heat the room when he's nicely insulated under a duvet. How proud a parent I am to be appreciated for my logic rather than resented for my refusal to pay high energy bills. I wonder if we made some laws, agreed some policies, and made it technically possible to turn off the heating in every house that's unoccupied, in every room that's not being used, in every dwelling during the time that everyone's at work or at school, what percentage of heating we would save. And well, you know that we already have thermostats, smart controllers, thermostatic radiator valves, and off switches. We can't really say that when they invent a way, we'll do that. It's just us not really doing it. Now think of a loo. Think of a loo at work or in your church or your bathroom at home. How long in a day do you spend in there? Factor in even the most leisurely of baths and a couple of comfort breaks. It's still a tiny fraction of the day. Why are you heating the rest of it, reheating it the rest of the time? Imagine if you could open the door to your loo on a cold day, and in the time it takes to check your social media or check yourself in the mirror, the room has automatically warmed itself. If you're old enough, that would be like in the days of those glowing red bathroom wall heaters, but better and faster. Well, you can. On-demand room heating is way easier to do than heating a church, and it's better. And yes, it's nice enough to emerge from a shower into a 20-degree even room temperature, but it's another of life's joys to emerge into a warmth that's like sunshine warming your bare skin. I could go on. There are, for example, so many good ideas that we could relearn from our predecessors, building from sustainable materials because everything else is, well, unsustainable. Having really good thick curtains because it's dark and it's cold outside. Wearing hats because we lose heat through our heads, and besides, who doesn't like a good hat? We have to save the world. We need to care better for God's creation. We're onto it. We are getting there, just not all of us, and nothing like fast enough. We might need to push the legislation more. We definitely need to be looking at affirmations of belief, aspirations, ambitions, and policies. They are critical to map the way forward and inspire progress. But we need to deliver carbon reduction and lifestyle changes in our own lives and wherever we have influence over the wider community. If you leave this conference today thinking that it's something you'll probably do when it really affects you, you're not being honest about what we've lost already. Beautiful and wonderful things that have gone already. Make the next thing you do this evening be a web search on recent climate change extinctions. If you leave this conference believing the technical challenges are too big, low carbon, low cost, and high comfort isn't possible yet, come and look at our heating trial in Bristol and then tell me it's not possible. If you leave this conference worried that a sustainable future only comes through losing the comforts and conveniences in life that you love, let's light a log fire, make a plum crumble, and then talk some more about life's true moments of joy. I mentioned at the beginning the creed. It depends on your church background which version you remember. They're all kind of similar, but for me it's the Nicene Creed, and at the end it's talking about the kingdom, but the last line says, we look for the resurrection of the dead and the life of the world to come. In a very earthly sense, we look for the life of the world to come. Sounds like a very good action plan, which I pray we will act on. Amen.
Simon, thank you hugely for that. And I think, Simon, between you and Louise, you've given us such a positive engagement in the practical ways and in the reasons why we're engaged within this. I think I love your bit about just talking about that joy of eating a plum and that delight that we are called to have in creation. And for me, it connects so well to in the Church of England our values, our 5 values for housing: that's sustainable, safe, stable, sociable, and satisfying. I think that sense of a satisfying place to live in. And one of my mantras, we build houses, but we build houses that need to become homes, and that's what you've both talked to us about. Now, I said, I think it'd be difficult, it might be about choosing between them, but I set Chris Beals a challenge earlier on today to give us a couple of questions that we could look at in some breakout groups. So Chris, challenge us with some questions to think about.
Okay, Louise posed 2 questions, which I wrote down as, where do you go to for information about greening your home? And her second one was, what is the role for the energy industry and government in promoting good practice? And I was struck by what she said about, particularly about ideology, and a previous prime minister who basically said, I think I got this right, our homes are our castles. And I think that my question would be, what ought we to be feeding into the different party manifestos about achieving the things that we've been hearing about this evening? And then the practical question right at the end that Simon said, how can we look for life of the world to come in practical terms for people, for the next generation, and for the existing world?
Lovely, Chris, thank you. That's the kind of starter for 10 for you. You'll get into your groups and you'll find that there are lots of other things that you want to talk about. The way in which, if you've not been to these gatherings before, the way in which we'll do this now is we're going to go into groups, and I think we'll go into groups for take us through till about 7:05, I think. And then we'll come back together. It'd be really good when we come back together if you've got comments or questions that you want to raise. The way in which we do that usually is I'll ask you to put them into the chat, and then particularly the questions I'll pick those up and we can engage together. The absolute promise that I make to you is that we will be finished by 7:20 by the time that we're advertised. Anybody who knows me well knows that I like meetings that run on time. So I promise we will be finished by 7:20, but let's go to the groups and we'll take a good 15 minutes or so, and they're just over in the groups for some discussion around that. You've got those questions, other things, and then come back with points that you really want to make or questions that you want to raise. So Catherine, Lucy, if you could put us into groups, I think we're going to go for groups of around 6 or so. That's great. And we'll see you very shortly. We've got 20 minutes or so now, which is just for us to pick up a rich discussion that Chris and I have been part of. I'm not sure we addressed the questions that much, Chris, did we? But that will be, but there will be good things. So do please go into the chat, and it would be good to have some comments that we want to pick up on. So who's going to be brave? Or you can stick up a flag and I'll call you, but come on.
Can I say just what that quote that we got from Chris Cook in our group, which was, energy use defines residence. And we were quite struck by that, because of course, when anyone is buying a house or whatever, they have to produce some evidence of how they can afford to pay for it. And energy is an increasingly important factor in all that.
Yeah, I thought that was really helpful indeed. That sense of and the picking up of that, if you want to prove residence, come along with the utility bill, because that proves that you're actually there and doing that. So our integratedness there. I wonder, I might just take John Murray's comment there, and Louise, if I can come back to you. You listened to Simon coming after you, and I wonder what your connection was there in that sense. John asked the question, church can be a place to communicate info on green energy. What is it that might be most helpful to Energy UK, to the work that you're doing in what we've been hearing there?
That's a great question. I think going back to some of the challenges I was highlighting to people and institutions investing in energy efficiency and decarbonisation is the fact that you have to have such a tailored approach, especially when you're thinking about listed buildings or in a conservation area. And so it's not always easy to access the right information that you need to be able to make an informed decision. It's not always easy to know how you can find a tradesperson who's trustworthy and competent to deliver the work. So I think it's about thinking about the different roles that different actors can play in providing and disseminating that information. We talked a bit about the role of local authorities in our group as being a really key advocate for helping communities access that kind of information. But I wonder to what extent churches can help people as well find out more about what they can do to green their home. So I would say on that information point, the more that we can talk to people about what's available to them, both in terms of government support and there's some of those smaller behavioural changes that I talked about as well. We'll start to see a really big difference aggregated across all communities and all local authorities.
It's kind of it is that kind of joined up approach and that sense about actually what it is to be a community in and how we then take responsibility for each other, which both challenges each other and supports each other. The group that I was in a bit of conversation about the kind of our home is our castle. Actually, I think something about the inadequacy of that as a way of living and as a way of tackling this crisis that we find ourselves in. I wanted to come back then to. There's some question there about cost and the impact that's having on our use of energy. Simon, do you want to come back on that? The kind of last year, how's the last year impacted what you've been doing from the perspective that you gave us?
It was interesting. Talked to a lot of churches about energy because we've been running the heating trial and so on, and it really sort of struck home on when we talk about climate crisis. We talk about it being an existential threat, and that's always a sort of big, big concept to get your head around. That that's big words, To have churches talk about the immediate existential threat of their having to pay their energy bills. They were barely getting through financially anyway, and now their energy costs are so high. And yet they want to do warm hubs over winter. They want to welcome more people into their church. They really want to, do mission and grow, but they just can't afford to keep going. And how striking it is that if a church has to, write that difficult letter to the diocese saying we're giving up, we're going to have to pack up, then that's worship and prayer and fellowship and that church family. It's also all their mission in that community, all their work, all their outreach, and all that they stand for in representing the church. I think that's really, a really big thing. In our group, we talked a little bit about solar, and there are these fantastic synergies. We have, our churches are spread all over the place, evenly distributed around the grid. In any church, if liturgical east is compass east, then half that roof at 45 degrees is an amazing solar harvester. And per church, that makes a lot of sense. But add it all together, and we become a network. We become a massive solar farm, which has huge potential. Either in terms of revenue generation to offset the incredible cost of buying electricity in the first place. The most tantalizing fact I can give you is that the church that's doing the heating trial doesn't have solar, but it's had the assessment done. And of course, solar panels don't generate much electricity over winter, but they generate some. And it was enough to run their radiant heaters on 1/3 to 1/2 power on all but the most overcast winter's days. It's really difficult, and heating church, running a church, financing a church, doing all the stuff that vicars and bishops have to do every day. It's tough, but it's there's some really exciting prospects in the mix as well.
I'm reminded, Simon, of years in the past when I used to be an archdeacon, and one of my most depressing. I think the policy has changed now. I've hoped the policy has changed, and I'm sure it has. When we first started talking about putting solar panels on churches, and there was a great thing about how they had to be hidden and they couldn't be seen because they were, quote, ugly. And I wonder how, and it's not just about churches, it's about village halls, it's about community buildings, it's about our houses as well, and how we get that change of culture to see that actually solar panels on our roofs are a thing that we should be immensely proud of. It's almost an embarrassment not to have them rather than to have them. And there's that culture change that we look for within that, and that sense of what we perceive, I guess, within what we look at in our landscape and in our houses.
And isn't it funny how we talk about the history of our churches by referencing moments of change, big things, Reformation, the effect of World War, what the Victorians did. The bit that fell off, the new North Aisle, these big changes quite often that reflect social change as well. What we're very proud of that. We're very proud of our history. But what better social response is there? We're looking at an existential threat to the planet. What better justification for just tweaking our heritage a little bit? And as you said, it doesn't have to blight our buildings. It needs to be done well, but if you can still see it, hallelujah. We're showing that we can adjust our historic buildings and that we are taking it seriously and doing something positive.
I'm absolutely with you there, Simon, and I think we will be on this call. I'm going to come to David Evans, and then Hugh, I'll come to your question as well. But David, can I pick up, and Louise, come to you? David's asked to what extent new build regulations are meeting the reasonable standards for energy efficiency. Louise, I wonder what your response is to that, and your challenge to us about what we should be pushing for.
Yeah, that's a great question. And really great to know that the church has kind of influence over these standards. So currently, the building regulations don't require a low carbon heating source to be installed. So we're still having new homes built with gas boilers, despite the fact that we will have to retrofit them in order to meet our legal net zero requirements. So there's a lot of frustration, I would say, amongst industry that's the case, because it's clear that we can move much faster. I mean, that change could happen tomorrow. Octopus Energy did a trial with Ilka Homes, which is a small house developer, and they built some zero energy bill homes that included solar panels, battery storage, and a heat pump. They were well insulated, so it does make them resilient to hotter summer temperatures as well. And I think that, you know, they've just built them and people are moving in, but it just shows that if the will is there, it's completely possible. So we're going to get the Future Home Standard from 2025, which will see developers have to put in low carbon heating, and that will most likely be air source heat pumps. Ground source heat pumps are extremely efficient and a really great solution for kind of medium-sized developments as well. So I guess in your discussions in the next couple of years, until we have that Future Home Standard, advocating for high fabric efficiency standards and low carbon heating sources will deliver the best outcomes for people moving into those homes, and they'll make sure that they're fit for the future as well. So yeah, I think that would be my...
Thank you. And again, it's all about that connectedness that we're looking at. Grateful for that. Hugh, you want to say something about just kind of, I think, joining up those points together about what we have an appearance.
Well, thanks. Thanks for that, Robert. Climate change means buildings need to change in their appearance, and this isn't just solar panels on the roof, which are obviously very important in terms of generating electricity. There's air source heat pumps that have to be dealt and thought about how they appear on the outside of the building, but it's also protection from extreme weather. We've all noticed the last few years how hot the summers are and how wet a lot of the year is, and this protection from this extreme weather that other parts of the world are familiar with. And this could be simple as overhangs and other things. These and even the ability to produce vegetables and growing for food. These are all things that need to be brought into the way buildings are coming forward in order that we can be more sustainable. It's the new paradigm, and it's not wallpapering concrete boxes in high carbon bricks and other bits and pieces that, quite frankly, a lot of these new blocks of flats, they can't be left out in the weather. They look awful after a few years. And anyway, that was me having my rant. But yeah, I see you nodding, Simon, so thanks for
that. I think absolutely that it comes back to, and Ruth was talking to the group, those 5 values from the Coming Home report. Chris, do you want to pick up on that? What are the connections here for Coming Home for you?
Sorry, trying to get my mic on. This has been really fascinating because you've mentioned the 5 values. We call them the 5 S's, and we're really keen to find a way in which we can do things which will be a real benefit to people in terms of affordability, but also in terms of beauty and sustainability, and to create places where people really love to live, because that seems to me to be absolutely at the heart of what all human beings should deserve. For me, there's a growing question. I can see how we can do things, particularly from 2025 onwards, in order to make new build much more appropriate in terms of what's being done and so on. But it's this huge job of retrofitting, and Louise gave us the statistics at the beginning, which are just staggering about the number of homes in our country which are pre-1973, let alone pre-Second World or First World War. And We live in a 1960s house and it's not terribly well built. So in that sense, it's not easy to insulate. And we've been told we couldn't put in an air source heat pump because it just wouldn't work in our particular design. Previously, we lived in a Victorian house and again, not well insulated and very difficult actually to heat. And I think an awful lot of people are stuck in these prejudices. So for me, there's a challenge. How do we really now start to, if you like, focus on the existing housing stock, as well as talking about how to create good new housing stock? And what are the steps that we need to be taking in order to be able to really help people to move from where we are now to where we need to become?
If I could make a suggestion, there, I think the most important thing to do is to inspire people. There are buildings that are harder to treat than others. I particularly dislike that phrase, hard to treat, because it sometimes feels like we've given up on something. And as soon as certain agencies hear that you're working with a hard to treat property, they'll go and find something that might be easier. I'm sitting at the moment in an 1860s Victorian house, which was a fantastic example of a hard to treat property that we bought in a near derelict state just over 10 years ago. And we've brought it up. I've never had it formally assessed, but I'd say that it's EPC-B at the moment. We couldn't quite get it to A, but we could do the best we could with what we've got. What I think we need to do is to create stories like that that make people who are in those more difficult properties accept that they might not be able to get to perfection, but they can get to an awful lot better than where they are. So they shouldn't give up before they've even started.
Andrew, thank you. And actually, that I absolutely agree with you. And it comes to the point that David Evans has made, and it was one that was going to me, that bit about the capital intensive nature of the change, particularly for existing houses. I know that in this diocese, when we're looking at our housing stock in which our clergy live and wanting to do the assessment around that. But I'm just wondering how on earth we find the resources to make the changes that we need to make to an existing housing stock to make those houses net zero, to make them energy efficient. I mean, Louise, I wonder, do you want? You've talked a bit about this already, but that challenge around what we have already and how we overcome that challenge of cost, capital cost.
Yeah, it's a really huge consideration, and there's quite a range of estimations about how much it might cost per household. So the Climate Change Committee, I think, estimates about £10,000 on average, but evidence given to the Environmental Audit Committee that did an inquiry a couple of years ago said it would be more in the region of £25,000. And over the last year, we've seen material prices for insulation and components that go in heat pumps, really escalate. So, by about 60%, I think the costs have gone up for these kind of materials. And we also have additional supply chain challenges as well as actually accessing them. So there are a lot of factors to contend with. And I think we can start to address those, I think, as we just discussed, by making this an aspirational challenge. So how do we try and change the conversation so that we value properties that have a high EPC rating? I've seen discussions about stamp duty in the chat, and that's a really great mechanism that we can use to encourage people to kind of be rewarded for investing in their property. Bringing more people into the industry will mean that we'll have kind of fewer constraints around supply, more domestic UK manufacturing. We already do a lot of manufacturing in the UK of insulation, but building that up as well and building up our heat pump manufacturing will also create more jobs, and it will reduce the carbon intensity of shipping products as well. But ultimately, sometimes it's a case of trial and error, trying new solutions on those hard to treat properties and finding what works. It's okay to it's okay to try things. And I think that we still need innovation in retrofit because it's currently very traditional. And can I just, before we move on, just echo Chris's sentiment around placemaking and the importance of thinking about the way that people live in these new build sites, and thinking about the role of nature as well, and having tree-lined streets and spaces for for biodiversity. It's so important for people's happiness and well-being, as well as decarbonisation and all the other things. So totally support that too.
No, I think that's so important, and that sense of I talked about how houses become homes, and then homes join together to build community, and that placemaking within that, absolutely crucial in what we're about. We're nearly running out of time. I'm going to come to Ruth and then to Chris for our last comments. Ruth, you've been very quietly, very patiently there with your hand up. Ruth, you'll need to be brief, I'm afraid. But
okay, I just want to talk about the fact that we need to go back to rented accommodation rather than ownership, and all this concentration on ownership will not get us anywhere. I lived in Australia for a long time, and I think the Church of England has a really terrible role history there with the Aboriginal people. Their culture says that we are the custodians of the land and we are not the owners of it. And I think we really need to get back to that idea that ownership is, how are we going to persuade landlords, for example, in this country, to take on the responsibility of insulation and retrofitting the flats that they rent out? There's no incentive for them to do that because they don't pay the energy bills. You know, their tenants pay the energy bills. I really think we need to go back to the whole idea of social housing, like the council housing, but actually controlled by the people that live there. That would be a very good initiative to begin, but you know, 2025, that's too late for new build as well. You know, why wait? Why not introduce these laws now? Anyway.
Ruth, thank you. I mean, I think it's really helpful, and that sense of I suspect there will be a mixed economy around for quite a long time, but that community and that responsibility that we owe to each other, which you clearly see in the rented sector, but we need to live across our communities. Chris, I'm going to come to you, other than me, because I get the last word.
Yeah, I mean, what we touched upon in our group was literally the possibility of what I call housing as a service. What we just heard from Ruth was about the current transactional commodity market of buy, borrow, build, and I won't use the rude word that follows. It's the transactional model. And what we can do is also treat energy as a service, because if in fact it's about the use of land, Ruth's point about renting, if it's about the use of land and co-ownership by having the right of continued use, then actually low carbon, rather than being a cost, becomes a benefit. Good quality, rather than being a cost, becomes a benefit, because you're looking at total cost of ownership over time. And that is the case in particular with energy and the supply. Instead of selling energy as a commodity, and I used to be a director of a commodity exchange, let's have a look at energy as a service. Heat, power, cooling, mobility, these are services. And if we then say, let's look at the least carbon fuel cost way of doing this, well, guess what? That's what Denmark did for 50 years, and why they are the most successful country in the world at decarbonisation today, which has been the subject of my study. So let's look at co-ownership, co-housing, look at the service provider model, look at the custodian service provider. And I believe that this does not require any change in the law, by the way. That was one of the criteria I was looking at ISRS, coming up with mutual agreements, because mutual agreements transcend jurisdiction, mutual agreements to actually, co-housing, co-living, co-heating, co-powering, etc., etc. That's why I'm so optimistic at the end of 10 years, because I can see how we can do this. I'll stop
Thank you,
there.
Chris. And I'm really grateful, and I love that sense of optimism. And for me, in all of these conversations, it's that positivity which I've heard this evening, which is what wins hearts and minds and brings us to the place where we want to be. Simon, you've just come up, but I was going to give Simon Louise. I was going to give you just a kind of one sentence, or possibly a couple of sentences, as you've listened to that. The last thing that you'd want us to hear as you reflect on what you've heard. Simon, let's go to you. You're looking horrified. Just off the top of your head, what's your one reflection on our time together this evening?
Oh, there are hundreds. It's really a difficult question to do in one sentence. I touched at the end of my talk. I touched on looking back and learning from the past. And I think there's a lot in that of, that we used to be much harder, much better at living with temperature variation and appreciating comfort. Yeah, so I guess I'm with the science. I'm very interested in U values, passive house, energy generation, green energy, feed-in tariffs, and all the rest of it. But I like a log fire and a plate of crumble, and the real joys in life. So
I'm absolutely, one of the delights of the house I live in at the moment is we have a log fire, and it is absolutely gorgeous. I quite agree with you on that. Louise, I'm going to do the same to you. It's probably very unfair, but one just a quick observation for us.
Yeah, I loved the principle of taking responsibility for each other, and I think that's something that really applies here, just in sharing your experience of how you've been able to, whether it's the church or the home or social housing, rented property, what's worked in terms of savings on energy bills and reducing energy demand. I think sharing that information is essential, and we are going to increasingly see locally led kind of projects and changes in our energy system. So the more that we can build community around that, I think is going to be really beneficial.
Yeah, thank you. And just thinking back to what you were saying as well on that how we take responsibility for each other. And I love the bit with the smart meters, where the way in which we'll take responsibility for the way in which we use our energy. I have a brand new smart meter. It doesn't work yet, but they promised me sometimes they will get it to work. So I'm living in hope and looking forward to it. But it is absolutely that way in which we care for each other. This has been such a positive discussion, Chris. As always, thank you to you. I'll give you a sentence as well, Chris. I should do that.
Thank you. I mean, it's been absolutely great. And I loved one of the things that Simon said when he was doing a quick historical look at what had been significant changes. We know about the church's, exciting changes because we know about the Reformation or Victorian, all those times when there have been significant changes. I think we're right for one now. And in the Coming Home report, that's called the church actually to get off its backside and get on with making real change. And I think that should apply in the way that our engagement with energy is worked out as well. So I think we should be absolutely determined. We should be kicking our own people as hard as we can to really pull in these changes. And thank you, Louise, because you'll be able to go back now to Energy UK and say that you've got some friends here who really want to work with you to achieve the kind of changes that I think you believe are necessary.
Chris, thank you. And Louise and Simon, thank you hugely to all who've participated in that. that great sense of community, that great sense of mutual responsibility, a real positive sense about what we can do. I so often go back in the scriptures that have shaped and formed me and many of us on this call, and that bit from Genesis at the creation, where God sees the world and says it is good, and that's what we want to be saying to people. It is good, and because it's good, that's why we care for it. That's why we care for each other. So thank you hugely for encouraging us, both in terms of stimulating our enthusiasm, in terms of practical things that we can do. A tremendous amount that we have learned tonight. Many of us here share the Christian faith, not all of us. So I'm just going to ask us at the end of our time together, we'll keep a moment of quiet together, and all of us, whatever faith or background we have, just remember that responsibility that we bear to each other and to our planet, and to present and future generations. And then, if you wish, join me in a prayer at the end of this evening. And gracious God, we give you thanks for our world. And we give you thanks that you have given us the means to care for it. And we pray that we may take our responsibility and care for each other, and so protect and sustain the creation which you have made and valued. Amen. Thank you all hugely. Been really good to be together this evening. Thank you also to Catherine and to Lucy for battling with the technology and getting us into the rooms. And I wish you a very good rest of the evening. Bye-bye.